Imagine that you walk through a forest in silence, hearing only the sound of your footsteps and the gentle rustle of leaves beneath your feet. Suddenly, you feel something, a presence, something invisible but undeniable. Your body stiffens, your heart races, and a voice inside you whispers, "Don't stay here." But why nothing happened? No visible threat, no apparent danger. And yet, you know. How to explain this? How can we trust this knowledge that does not come from the logical mind, but from a deeper, more ancient place? Alan Watts would tell us that life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. And in this experience, there is much more wisdom in feeling than in thinking. There are moments when the universe speaks to us in whispers, and we, eager to rationalize everything, ignore what we already knew before we knew that energy doesn't lie. That the human being, as part of the whole, is equipped with an invisible radar that captures what the eyes cannot see. This radar is intuition, this echo of the Tao, this silent memory of the One where everything is already known before it even becomes conscious. But we live in a world that values logic, that demands proof, that condemns instinct to the realm of superstition. We are taught from an early age to doubt ourselves, to silence our inner voice in the name of reason. And so, when we feel that something is wrong with someone, even for no apparent reason, we repress that perception and try to convince ourselves that we are exaggerating, that we shouldn't judge, that maybe the darkness we feel is ours, not the others. However, what we call judgment can often be just pure perception. And there is a fundamental difference between judging based on bias and perceiving based on resonance. A person's energy, what they carry in their presence, passes through us like the wind passes through the trees. And if there's dissonance, if there's a subtle noise in the air when someone walks in that shouldn't be ignored, Watts invites us to look beyond the masks, to realize that the self that others show us is rarely the true self. Each of us is a stage for multiple personas. Some, conscious, others, denied shadows that lurk in the unconscious. And what Jung called the shadow is exactly that part of us that we reject and therefore project onto others. So we encounter people who make us feel small, guilty, drained, not because we are weak, but because we absorb what they don't want to see in themselves. And here's the danger: if you don't know your own shadow, you'll see it everywhere but in yourself. And even more so, he will be the recipient of the shadow of others. To be strong, therefore, is not to harden against the world, but to become permeable to the inner truth, feeling when something isn't right, and even if you can't explain it, having the courage to trust. Now imagine someone approaching you with a smile, with sweet words, with promises of deep connection. At first, everything seems light, fluid, almost magical. But little by little, something changes. You start to feel exhausted after each encounter. You feel like you need time to compose yourself. And although nothing objectively bad happened, your energy always seems lower after these interactions. This is no coincidence. It's vibration. Some people, as Watts would say, are so far removed from their essence that they need to suck the light from others to feel that they exist. Not out of malice, but out of disconnection. They are those who have not yet learned to nourish themselves from the flow of life, and that is why they create bonds that drain rather than exchange. There is no balance, there is no reciprocity, there is just a disguised demand for attention. And what do you do when you realize this? When do you see that someone behind their charm and enchanting presence brings with them a trail of confusion, instability, drama? Do you try to help? Do you stay out of loyalty for fear of appearing cold? But what about your peace? Watts would remind us that true compassion begins with oneself. That protecting your energy is not selfishness, it is spiritual intelligence. Because there are people who don't scream, but silently erase you, who do not ask, but demand by simple presence. They are experts at making you feel like you are in constant debt, even if they never say it directly. It's an invisible weight, a tiredness that grows with each encounter, a shadow that projects itself on you as if it were yours. And if you're not paying attention, you'll start to believe that it's your problem, that you are weak, which is exaggerating, that you need to be more patient, more understanding, more present. But is this love? Is this a real connection? Watts might smile when he hears this question and say, true love never demands that you abandon yourself. He invites you to be whole. And relationships that drain your essence, that make you doubt yourself, are not sacred. They are prisons in disguise. And no matter how much the ego clings, no matter how much the mind rationalizes, the soul knows. I always knew. She writhes in her chest, she cries in silence, she screams in her dreams, and the path back to yourself begins when we decide to listen to that soul. Watts said is often the awakening mechanism, because it is when we are most hurt that we seek something beyond the visible. It is when we feel most lost that the invitation to self-knowledge becomes irrefutable. So if you've been through this type of relationship, if you've felt your light being turned off little by little, maybe it wasn't in vain. Perhaps this was the beginning of his return, the call to remember who you are. And when you remember, something changes. You start to notice the signs, the unspoken words, the subtle discomfort, the relief that comes when certain presences move away, and you learn to choose, selecting wisely who can enter your inner temple, because yes, your mind, your energy, your peace are sacred, and not everyone is ready for this space, because it is precisely in the midst of chaos that clarity is often born. And in every bond that has limited us, there is also the seed of liberation waiting for us to water it with courage. Courage to say no to what doesn't expand us. Courage to recognize that love should not hurt nor suck nor take us away from who we are. Courage to return home, inside, to the silence where the truest voice of all lives that have awakened consciousness. And if there is a deep lesson in all of this, it is that peace never screams, but it always responds when we seek it sincerely. And you listening? Some souls cannot bear the light, not out of malice, but because they have lived in darkness for so long that the light becomes unbearable. And there is something deeply sad and beautiful about that, because even those who hurt us, who empty us, who manipulate us, are parts of the same totality. They are also waves from the same ocean. But that doesn't mean we should go down with them. Being compassionate is not about sacrificing yourself. It's understanding without being contaminated. It is to desire the healing of others without losing your own. How many times do we confuse love with attachment, with the obligation to stay, with the idea that we are only good if we accept everything, if we endure everything? But Watts shows us that living fully is not tolerating the intolerable, but rather being in harmony with who we really are. And for that, sometimes you have to leave, get out of certain stories, certain cycles, certain bonds, not with resentment, but with gratitude. Because even those who hurt us are masters in disguise, teaching us the value of coming home, inside, to the source. And when we return to the source, we realize that we were never truly lost, just distracted. Life, with all its complexity, is like a river that never stops flowing. And even when we believe we are adrift, being dragged by the current of events and the emotions of others, there is always the possibility of remembering you are not the water, you are the space through which it flows. This memory changes everything, because then you stop identifying with the chaos of others, with the emotional demands of others, with the fear of appearing tough when protecting yourself. You understand that true balance is not keeping everyone happy, but keeping yourself whole. And whole does not mean closed. It means knowing where you end and where the other begins. But there is something even more subtle, something that you may have already experienced without naming it, that feeling that around certain people you start to forget yourself. You change your words, your posture, even your opinions, not because someone directly forced you, but because unconsciously you began to seek approval. and little by little it loses its authenticity, as if I were playing a role. This is also a type of drainage. Alan Watts would speak of the illusion of the self as something that is endlessly constructed and dissolved, and he would warn us, be careful with people who force you to dress up as a character to be loved, because in this theater you do not become more loved, just more absent from yourself. These silent relationships, where manipulation is not blatant, but persistent, where affection is conditional, are dangerous, because they infiltrate the soul like a fog. When you realize it, you no longer know how to distinguish whether the discomfort you feel is yours or was planted there. And that's where the importance of returning to the body comes in, to the visceral sensation, to the intuition that never stopped speaking. You don't need to understand everything to respect how you feel. You don't even need to have proof to walk away from something that hurts you. Your perception is valid, its clarity is sacred, and sometimes saying no is the biggest. Yes, you can give yourself, and there is yet another type of presence that needs to be recognized, one that not only demands your light, but tries to mold it, forcibly sculpt it to fit the mold of your own needs. People who cannot stand their freedom, not because it hurts them, but because it exposes the prison in which they chose to live, and unconsciously they will seek to tie their wings with the bonds of conditional affection. I love you, but only if you are like this. I accept you, but as long as you don't change. I am here, but you must place me at the center of your world. Sound familiar? Watts would say that true freedom is not in living without ties, but in cultivating only those who dance with their soul, and not those who tighten their necks. And there is a fierce beauty in learning to cut cords that suffocate us, even if they are full of memories, even if they are beautiful, even if one day they were love, because there are times when the most loving thing we can do is leave. Not to punish, not to escape, but to keep alive the spark that insists on being what it is. And there are also those who, when they see this spark lit, try to extinguish it with cynicism, with sarcasm, with doubts planted with the care of someone who knows where their wounds hurt most. Maybe you've heard, "You've changed," as if change were a defect, as if evolving would betray the old pact of shared suffering. Because the truth is that there are those who prefer you to stay small, not out of malice, but because your growth reveals how stuck they are. And it's easier to slow yourself down than to speed themselves up. And here comes the most subtle discernment of all, knowing the difference between the love that strengthens us and the attachment that paralyzes us. One rejoices in our flourishing, the other fears that our petals will cover his shadow. Watts would remind us that the universe is movement, that everything that tries to freeze us is contrary to the dance of existence. And so we need to be aware of those who behind a smile secretly desire our stagnation, not out of hate, but out of fear. And make no mistake, this fear of others, when not recognized, turns into a trap. This is advice that sounds like concern, but is an attempt at control. There are compliments followed by warnings. These are silences that punish. These are absences that teach us to remain silent. And if you allow it, these small, invisible blows erode your spontaneity, your joy, your natural shine. You begin to wonder if you are exaggerating, if you are being selfish, if you need to hold the line to keep the peace. But what peace is this? Built on the denial of who you are. What peace is this that asks you to hide your light so as not to disturb those who have become accustomed to the darkness? There is an answer that doesn't need words. It vibrates in the body, trembles in the hands, pulsates in the chest. It's the soul saying, not here, not that, that's not me. And when that whisper becomes a scream, when that vibration turns into urgency, don't hesitate, trust, move away. Because the universe does not take away what is essential. He clears the way. And those who fall away when you start to shine brighter weren't really with you. They were with the version of you that was easier to control. And maybe you're still wondering, why is it so difficult to realize this at the beginning? Why is it so common to only identify these patterns when we are already deeply involved? The answer lies not in a lack of intelligence, but in the nature of the human bond itself. The heart wants to belong. He craves connection. And this desire, when unconscious, becomes fertile ground for illusions. Sometimes what you interpreted as affinity was actually mutual neediness. What seemed like empathy was just the dance of wounds recognizing each other. And what you called love was an emotional survival pact. Watts would make us see that the truth is not in what the other says, but in the feeling that remains after. He leaves the energy trail, residual vibration. There are presences that make us calmer, more centered, more whole. And there are others that leave us confused, drained, disconnected from ourselves. And the difference is right there in the trail, because true love does not generate chaos, nor doubt, nor fear. It does not require explanations or justifications. He just is. Like water that flows effortlessly, like the breeze that refreshes without asking for anything in return. But to recognize this, you have to remain silent. Not the silence of the outside world, but the silence within. Because only there in the stillness of being can we hear what the words hide. It is in this place that we realize that life speaks to us all the time, that the body feels before the mind knows, that the spirit retreats before the ego realizes. And if we learn to trust that feeling, we will begin to move more lightly, more precisely, more authentically. Watts said that we confuse who we are with what we think about ourselves. But what we are, in fact, is something much broader. It is the space where thoughts happen, where emotions come and go, where experiences unfold. And in that space, there is enough wisdom to recognize who nourishes you and who drains you, who expands you and who shrinks you, who dances with their soul and who tries to prune it. Often the manipulation is subtle. It comes disguised as care. It comes in the form of someone who says, "I only want the best for you," but who systematically plants doubts about their abilities. Someone who always seems well-intentioned, but who in practice slowly sabotages you. And the worst part, it does it so strategically that you start to doubt your own perception. This is the real danger. Because when you lose confidence in yourself, you open the door for others to dictate not only your steps, but also your internal narrative. This is how the cycle of self-denial begins. You start to shut up, to withdraw, to avoid conflicts, to accept more and more. Because you believe that if you change something, you will lose love, respect, and the presence of others. But what is actually lost is the link with its essence. And when that happens, little by little, you turn into a shadow of yourself. You keep smiling, keeping commitments, even loving, but it's not you anymore. It is a reflex conditioned by the fear of displeasing, of being rejected, of being alone. And at this point, an act of courage is needed. Not the courage to face the other, but the courage to look inside and recognize that you betrayed yourself. That at some point, out of love, out of attachment, out of necessity, you abandoned yourself. And that pain, no matter how hard it is liberating, because it tears the veil of illusion and allows you to see clearly. And with clarity comes freedom. The freedom to say, enough is enough. The freedom to go out, to rebuild yourself, to trust yourself again. Remember that your intuition never lied. You were the one who didn't know or didn't want to listen. And here, a new journey begins. Not the journey of finding the right other, but of becoming whole for yourself. Because when you fill yourself with yourself, you naturally begin to attract what resonates with your truth. You no longer need to beg for attention, tolerate emotional crumbs, or bend over backwards to fit in. You simply are. And whoever is able to see the beauty of its entirety will remain, not out of necessity, but out of affinity. not out of need, but out of real love, not out of dependence, but out of shared freedom. And then you begin to understand true protection is not in high walls, in chronic distrust, or in emotional isolation. It is born from clarity. Clarity is the most subtle and powerful shield there is. When you see clearly, there is no need to fight anymore. You just don't go in. Don't get involved. Don't stay where your soul doesn't breathe. And something curious starts to happen. When you align with your truth, certain people simply disappear from your life. No fights, no explanations. They feel that they no longer have access to what they used to manipulate. They feel that something in you is firm, serene, immobile. And this presence, firm and silent, is the biggest threat to those who live off the chaos of others. Because the silence of an awakened soul is like a mirror, it reflects the disorder of those who have not yet found themselves. And you, on the other hand, start attracting different dates, lighter, more true. You begin to realize that someone's presence can be as nourishing as meditation, that there are looks that don't judge, words that don't hurt, touches that don't demand. You rediscover what it's like to be with someone and still remain whole, and that changes everything. But this new state does not come without ruptures. He charges a price, that of honesty. Being honest with yourself is the deepest form of love, and also the most difficult, because it demands that you recognize that for too long you have allowed it. You accepted. You ignored signs, silenced your intuition, rationalized emotional abuse, and you need to forgive yourself for that, not with the condescension of those who don't want to learn, but with the compassion of those who understand that before lucidity there was fear, and that fear is also human, but it no longer needs to be your guide. Watt said, "We are ocean waves, and the wave doesn't need to make an effort to exist. It's the ocean in motion. So are we when we stop fighting our nature and just flow with it. We don't need to justify what we feel, nor argue about what we perceive. Feeling is enough. And respecting what we feel is an act of spiritual maturity. Energy doesn't lie, she just is. And if you learn to listen to it, to trust it, you begin to live more lightly. You begin to naturally move away from everything that is dense, forced, manipulative, not out of anger, not out of pride, but by tune, like a flute that stops vibrating with a melody that no longer belongs to it. And in this space of reconnection with being, you realize that you don't need to have all the answers. You don't even need to understand the other to free yourself from them. What is enough is a deep yes to what you feel, a silent but non-negotiable. Yes, because that is the door. It's the beginning. It's the choice to be whole even if it means being alone for a while. Because it's better to be alone in peace than accompanied by emotional hell disguised as company. Conscious solitude is not emptiness, it is abundance without distraction. It is the space where your soul breathes freely, where your ideas flourish again, where your dreams make sense again, and over time, everything around aligns. You attract what vibrates at the same frequency, and stop insisting on what is only sustained by illusion. And it is here at this point on the path that you understand walking away from those who suck your peace is not a difficult decision when you deeply love your own presence. When you finally return home to the sacred temple, within you, you realize that you never had to convince anyone to stay, because those who are in tune with their truth don't need to be convinced. They just recognize it, and it remains. And this permanence, when it happens, has no urgency, no requirement. It is smooth, almost imperceptible. It doesn't take up too much space, it doesn't suffocate. It just is. Like a comfortable silence, like a breeze that comes through the window without asking permission. But when it enters, it makes everything lighter. This is what happens when we connect with someone who doesn't carry the weight of the need for control, who doesn't project their frustrations onto us, who doesn't try to mold us to fit their insecurities. It's rare, but it is possible. And it always starts from within. Because every true relationship is a reflection of the state of consciousness we are in. If we are disconnected from ourselves, we will attract confusion. If we are at peace, we will attract serenity. The world, as Watts said, is the mirror where the self contemplates itself. And when you change inside, everything changes outside. But not by magic, but by vibrational coherence. You no longer tolerate what you once tolerated. He no longer strives to be loved. You just are, and that's enough. But don't be fooled. There will be tests. Life with its wisdom sends us repetitions not to punish us, but to see if we really learn. And when the lesson is about limits, about energetic protection, it will come dressed in new faces, new stories, new promises. The question will be, do you recognize the pattern? Do you hear yourself this time, or will you silence your intuition once? Again, there is an austere beauty in the act of saying no. No to what no longer represents you. No to what dims your light. No to what disguises prison as care. This no said with love and firmness is like a sword of fire that cuts what is no longer. There, he's scary, yes, because the ego fears losing, but the soul, oh, the soul smiles. Because she knows that every no said to the false is a profound yes to the real. And the real thing, when it arrives, does not require applause or explanations. He just walks in, fits, and it fills without invading. It's the kind of love that doesn't disfigure you. On the contrary, it reveals you. It brings you closer to who you are in essence. And this, perhaps, is the most divine experience we can have in this life. But we only access the real when we have the courage to cross the unreal, when we stop asking for permission to exist, when we no longer apologize for being intense, sensitive, deep, when we say, this is me, and if this bothers you, the problem is not with me, but with what you are not yet ready to accept. And so we learn that separation is not always an end. Often it is a return to the center, to silence, to peace in its entirety. It's life sweetly saying, you've forgotten yourself. Come back, and you come back. More whole, more aware, lighter, and above all, more faithful to your own vibration. And when you come back, something changes forever. Because you won't come back the same. Come back more attentive, more sensitive to what previously went unnoticed. You notice when the environment is heavy, when a conversation has a disguised tone of sweetness, when a smile hides intentions that your eyes don't capture, but your soul feels. And you stop insisting, stop justifying, stop trying to save those who don't want to be saved from carrying pains that are not yours, from accepting the presence of those who abandon you every time you need them most. You realize that there is a silence within you that no one else can violate, a sacred space where your purest truth lives. And this space is non-negotiable. It's your home. And to protect it, you learn to recognize the signs. Learn that energy doesn't lie. That intuition is the language of the soul. That persistent discomfort is a wake-up call, not your failure. That the clarity that bothers others is the same that frees you. And when one day you come across someone again who carries chaos disguised as affection, you won't need to confront them. He will just smile silently and walk away. Because true maturity is not in winning arguments, but in preserving one's own peace. True wisdom is not in accumulating theories, but in respecting what you feel. And true love, oh, true love begins with you. It's born when you look at yourself and say, I choose myself, even if it costs people memories, bonds, because in the end, you will realize that nothing true is lost when you choose yourself. What goes, goes, because it was never whole. Because it was never love. It was attachment. It was lack. It was projection. And what remains is what vibrates at the same frequency as your soul. So protect your energy like someone protecting a sacred fire. Stay away from what erases. Surround yourself with what lights up. Choose wisely where to place your gaze, who to share your silence, with who to offer your time to. Because all of this is sacred. All of this is life. And life, as Watt said, is not a problem to be solved. It is a mystery to be danced. And now I ask you, are you willing to dance with your truth? Are you ready to leave behind everything that weighs you down, everything that pulls you down, everything that confuses your light with the shadow of others? If you made it this far, write in the comments, "I choose my peace." This way I will know that you were with me until the end of this reflection. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like this video. This helps other people find this content too. Share with someone who might need to hear this today. And if you want to continue this journey of awakening, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Here, every week, we reflect together on consciousness, energy, spirituality, and the path back home. I'm your inner voice disguised as words, and I'll wait for you in the next video. Until then, take care of your light.